Hey everybody, it's David Becker here again with the BeckerArt tip. And it's a little bit longer tip because we're going to talk about smooth and textured surfaces on watercolor paper. So when you're doing watercolors and you're pretty much doing either a very smooth wash or a textured wash. And so I want to show you a couple of different ways of getting some really beautiful smooth edges and some washes and some also really beautiful textured washes. So let's just get right to it. And so I've got, going to be doing this on cold press paper just so you see that you can get smooth edges not only on hot press and stuff, and actually a lot of times the textured stuff you can get better on hot press than on a textured paper. Because if it's going to be hard edged, that's how you get texture. So let me just show you first on all the smooth textures that I get, because there's a little bit fewer smooth than there is textured surfaces. So with the smooth surface, what you want to do is you let the water, in watercolor, it's all about the water making everything smooth for you. So when you're doing a wash, a gradation or whatever, you put down water first, and you can put down water with a color too, just so you can see where you're going. And so let's say I just wet the paper. And so if you wet the paper, then to put a smooth edge on, it's the water that smooths out the edge for you. It's not you rubbing anything like that. It's the water making everything smooth for you. And so let's just go with red. And so I'm just gonna, oops, I'm sorry. We're just gonna put that on there. And so we're gonna put a wash here. And so we're just going across with a wash. And we're just gonna try to make it as smooth as possible. And let's say you want it all to be the same value in color. Then you put the same amount on your brush and just keep on going across it. And then little by little, you just lightly rub your brush over the surface of water, and then just let the paint sit on the puddle of water, which I call floating your pigment, and you just leave it there, and it'll become a very smooth edge. I mean, there's smoothness in there. Now, if you want to get a gradated area from like a dark to a light, and let's not go with red because that's really bright to see. So let's try it with a little bit darker color. Let's go with like a violet. I'll go with a violet next to that. And so what I'm going to do first is just take pure water. And again, this is now the smooth and how to get some smooth edges. And I put the water down first. Now this smooth edge would be a little bit harder on hot press than it is on cold press. And also depends on how your paper absorbs. Is your paper absorbing a real lot? Then it's going to be a lot easier to get a soft edge because it's absorbing into the paper, almost kind of like a sponge. And if it's a hot press where it's sitting on top, then you have to let the water pretty much make it smooth by itself. So here's a little bit of lavender in my brush, and so just to see where my water was. Now I want to make it from a dark to a light, but I want it smooth. And again, the water is what makes watercolor smooth, makes your pigment smooth. So I'm going to take a really big amount of purple, start up here, and a lot of times if you're going and doing a smooth edge, when it comes to a gradation, you kind of want to tilt the paper up a little bit, and so you throw something underneath the front of it, and that way it'll run down slowly and give you a it automatically kind of runs down the pigment and gets you smoother as you go down because it's running down. And again, then I'll go back in with a little bit thicker pigment, and I'll go up here and just kind of go down, make it dark. And I'm rubbing it. Of course, you rub it kind of smooth, but see those lines in there? Those will go away. And I'm going across instead of up and down because across then will let it float into the water and then just slowly run down a little bit if you have a slight angle on it. And down here, I'm going to add a little bit more water. Oops, a little bit too much paint. And just take and let it be a little bit lighter, getting lighter and lighter and lighter, right? And so if I feel there's too much pigment right there, I pull it out. So there we have a gradation, and that's a good way of getting a smoothness to it because again, you are not making it smooth, the water is making everything smooth. Now if you were to try to always go to an edge, that's hard to make something like this happen. So a lot of times you would have masking fluid or tape or something, or you have to go all the way across an area so that you don't have to stop right there because as you can see, when you get stuff to the edge, a lot of times the water collects right there. So you try to make things in the middle or take masking fluid or tape or something, and so that you don't have to stop with your brush, but going through it, going farther than where it has to be, is that how you get soft edges. The only part I don't have is right there, and so I'm just going to take my brush and just kind of gently rub right there. And again, let the water soften your edges. You do not do that. You let the water take the pigment and just disperse it amongst the paper, and so making a smooth edge. The only other way that you can make a smooth edge, and that's with an airbrush. That's like a super fine way of making really smooth edges. And I have one right here. This is a built-in compressor onto this one. It has a battery, a chargeable battery. I'm gonna turn it on, and I didn't clean this one, so hopefully it'll work. But see, it just starts, and I'm just gonna go on here and look at how soft an edge you can make with that. And so I just put a little bit of paint in there. All sprayed out already. But see how that's a soft edge? Again, just go over it with an airbrush, and that's the only other way of getting a really soft edge. And again, a lot of times to get to the edge of things, the airbrush is a little bit easier because you can soften it and just blow it into that area and make it from a gradation very simply compared to something like this. As you can see, look, it even went into this water and it actually was very smooth. Again, this is how to make smooth, either airbrush or that's the finest you can get. And I've seen paintings at some of the award shows, and I've seen where they've done the whole picture with an airbrush and a lot of stencils and cutting like that out, cutting things out like that. But that's how you get the smooth edges, either water, floating your pigment in the water, or an airbrush. You can also, when it's dry, they have these things called the hake brush, and I've seen a couple artists where they use this to soften, or putting white over something, or taking a wash. And let's just do it real quickly right here. Is when you put down your pigment, you take the hake brush dry, and let me just show you. We'll just take this, and we're going to put down a color. And again, I'm going to do it wet. But see, now I'm going to take a lot of pigment here, and to soften inside there, I'm just going to make a round circle. Let's just make a round circle, and see how it's not, it's not very smooth inside, and there's different variances of the paint. In some areas thicker or thinner. You take your hake brush, your dry hake brush, and then you go across it really lightly, and it'll smoothen it out for you. Because basically what it's doing, I think it's taking the water out, and see how it softens that edge. But of course, again, beyond where this part is, that's very soft down there, but beyond that, where it is dry out here, that's going to be hard edged, and it's going to be textured. And so there's a way of making it textured too. So getting into the textured part of it, you could take a hake brush like this and go onto a dry surface, and most of the textures you make are on a dry surface. So here, look how soft that is now, because I took a hake brush and went across it and kind of softened it up. And that's one way of making a soft, smooth surface that's not letting it do it on its own. So there's your 3 ways I can show you how to make a really soft, smooth, continuous surface. So that's a soft. Now let's get to the textured part. Textured part, you got to realize, is that sometimes you have an area like a background or something, and you want to have it textured. Now the textured can be either smooth or hard edged. When you're making a texture smooth and soft edge, you would wet the surface and then apply some of these things to that I'm going to be showing you in a second. So let's say we want this to be textured. So, and it's soft, and you want those things to be soft edge. So I'll go back over this with water. And one of the, of course, most common ways of adding texture to your paper is spattering and making it, taking the same color here. I'm going to take that blue, wetting it down, and then just tapping one brush onto other and getting texture by spraying, tapping, and getting little marks. And that's going to be more textured, right? Now it's wet, so that these will be soft edged. The texture will be soft edged and not hard. If you want a texture on a hard surface, you can do that over here too on the dry, and those edges will be hard because it's not floating, it's not dispersing. So that's one way of getting a texture. You can also take your hake brush again on this and then soften those or make it a different kind of texture by just really lightly going across it, giving it a little texture. Again, a different type of texture. Now I'm softening this up because it was on dry, but now see how it's soft edged, the edges? And over here, same thing. I can make it a little bit harder, or I can rub it and make it a different kind of texture because I'm rubbing the little dots I had in there. So again, that's one way of making a texture. Then there's a million with different things of when you take, let me just take this paper out and turn it over here. So I'm gonna put this on here. So one way of doing texture also, again, either on drier surface or a wet surface. And if you're doing it on a dry surface, you're going to get hard edges. And if you want to do it on a wet surface, you get soft edge thing. One way is cellophane paper. if you want to basically put down your cellophane into the wash and then make a texture. So this basically, it's hitting parts of this, and that's on dry paper, so you're getting a hard edge. Now you can also do it on a wet surface. And so if I put, let's say I put down paint, I'll put down paint, and then what it's doing, you can take out, something that will happen is it'll pick up, the cellophane will pick up some of this, and you'll get texture in the wetness. Again, it's a little bit different. And then you can do that. You can also put all kinds of things in tissue paper. One of the things I like to show people is when you have paper towel that is textured. So if I put down again a color, if I put down a color here, cellophane is one way, and also depending on what kind of cellophane, I have this right here. Hold on a second. I have really thin plastic, and what you can do for that is the same thing, where you put down and it picks up, and it gives you kind of a nice texture that way too. See how it just, you're putting down and making texture, rolling it. And they do this on walls, like on your wall, to get a different kind of texture. Again, that's wet, and you can also do it on dry. You can actually paint put some paint onto the surface here and then dab it down. I've seen people do that with cellophane. Then there is wax paper. Wax paper, now you got to realize that when you put wax paper onto your surface, what's going to happen is it's going to make a resist. And so look for the side that it has the wax on it. And a lot of people do this for their signature. I've seen people do this for their signature, where they write something or they get a certain kind of texture, and you realize that texture is going to be whatever, like the white of the paper, or if you put a wash over it, whatever that surface is that you're putting the wax on, that's going to be this. So let's say I print my name up here, or my signature, and so now I did that with wax paper. Now if I put a wash over that, there you go, and see, it's resisted, and actually, it went right over, but you can kind of see it. Let me do it again. You have to put one wash over it, and basically, did I do the right side? I'm not sure if wax paper is on both sides. Anyways, let's try it again. You take a wash, put it right over it. Let's see, put it right there. See how I just put it right there? And so now you can see that that's resisted. So it makes it a resist, but then again, if this is a resist, but let's say you want a texture, so you can take this down and put, you know, even scratch something on the surface to make it look, you know, maybe you're going like this or doing a different kind of texture. You do this type of thing, and then that'll give you that, whatever texture that you put the wax paper on top of that. So see, it's a little bit, you know, a bunch of little lines there I put in. Again, a bunch of little lines. That's a certain kind of texture. It's kind of, this is really great for abstracts, when you're doing abstracts and you need a certain type of texture. Or if you're making things float away and you don't really want to show what that is, and you need just a neat surface, a very textured surface, that's one way of doing it. If you want wood, maybe the grain in the wood is this wax paper you put down. Now remember, it's going to put it on whatever color. So if I dried like some of this pink right there, and then I put another darker color on that, this pink is going to shine through that. But one thing about the wax paper, it stays and it doesn't go away. So it's there permanently. Now another thing I've seen people use is aluminum foil. Again, either by taking it, crumpling it up and using it as like your applicator, or putting down a surface of water. So, you know, putting down a surface here of paint, putting it down, and then taking your wax paper or your aluminum foil, and then what's happening is you're getting an aluminum foil look. You know, it's picking up certain parts, and I've seen people do it with also a lot of this stuff is done with acrylics, so that you paint the aluminum and then just put it on there. Again, it's a certain kind of surface, and you just gotta play with this. This is the kind of thing you just have to try on scrap sheets of paper, like I'm doing right now. You can scrape with this too. You can scrape, you know. It all depends on what you want. And look at this, actually going in there and wrecking the paper. It's kind of like giving it a harsh edge and stuff. So that's aluminum foil. How about paper towel that has a texture on it? A lot of paper towels that you buy, they have a texture. There's some kind of texture into the surface. And so to get that texture is you put down this over. I used that side already. Let's go to this area right here. I'll put down a wash, a light wash, and then I'll take this and lay it over it, give it a slight, pull it up, and as you can see, if I show you closely up, it gives you a little texture of the actual paper towel. See how it takes part of the surface up and it leaves some of the white of the paper. So that's another way of getting a texture. Then there's the things that you apply, and I'm not going to do that and show you because it takes too long. Sometimes the salt, using salt, throwing salt on there. Alcohol, the alcohol that you buy in the bottles, you spatter that, it separates it. Actually, I like to get texture sometimes just by putting down a wash and then just spattering with my hand. Watch this. So let's say it's best to do it with dark so you can see. So I'll put down a wash of dark. Also, depending on how you handle your brush on a dry surface, you can do like a dry brush effect with your brush itself. But let me just show you this for a second. There's so many ways. I get so excited about how many different ways you can get texture in your paper. But see, now it's just a wash, right? You take your finger, put it into the water, and then just spatter it. Spatter like that. Look at that nice surface. You get a little like starry effect. And that, depending on how wet it is and how much pigment you have in there, it's all something you have to build on yourself and just try. Just like when I tell my students, learn how to use your brushes by just practicing with them on a sheet of paper. Well, learn how to do textures and smoothness by just practicing. Don't do a painting to do that. Just take scrap sheets of paper, or you can buy some cheaper paper that you're not, really, it's a little bit cheaper. You can go in and get like 25 sheets on Amazon. And I will put them in this image where you can get a stack of paper that's really cheap paper. But then you can just practice these type of things and not feel like you're wasting any paper, good paper. And so see how that just gives it a little bit of effect. You can wait a little bit, do some more. That's just sped it down. And this has the effect of like a salt has, where it gives it a little texture. Now there's also a way of taking your brush and then loading it with a lot of pigment and then having a dry surface. And then there's called dry brushing. But there's also dry brushing with a loaded brush of paint and water, where you take your brush across the surface quickly. So you go across it quickly, and you're picking up a surface. Now my brush is really loaded with a lot of water, a lot of paint, but I'm just barely touching the side of the brush. And so it gives you a texture, right? And then with this texture, you can do other things too. You can then take your airbrush, you can take your atomizer, and you can put water on there and let that spurse out. Or your spray bottle, your mister, you can put that on there, and it'll also give you a little bit of different kind of texture. Again, play with everything. Here I just took it and see how it's going to bring these things together. Again, just another way of taking and making texture. Also, you can dry your brush. Actually, that's the kind of a dry brush technique, but you can actually dry your brush and just pick up pretty pure pigment, and then just keep on dabbing it on your paper towel, and then just really lightly rubbing it across. Now this is a little bit tougher on your brushes because it will you're scrubbing your bristles. So, and this is very dry. My brush hardly has any pigment or water in it, but a lot of pigment. And so I'm just kind of pushing it across there. Again, texture. It's either hard edge texture, soft edged texture, and then there's the smoothness, which is smoothness meaning everything is smooth, like on the back here, where we got it in the beginning, where we really made it nice and smooth. Here also they make spray bottles. If you buy like throat lozenges, bottles, I know they have those throat, and what you do is you dump that stuff out, but it makes it like a spurt. And it used to be a Windex bottle. They have the little white top, and you can put on, and it'll spurt little dots on there. That's another way of doing it. I like to just take my brush though, and to get dots, I just take your brush and spatter. How about a toothbrush? That's the same thing. So here, look at this. There's a lot of texture, right? And it's dots, same thing. And the bigger the dots you want, the more water you use. Just use more water and get a little bit closer to the surface. Also directing your spatter for texture. So I'm going pretty fast with these textures, and you can just rewind it and try things. But I want to put as much as possible into that. There's also these brushes that you buy that are made for texture. This is called a funny brush, and it's rubber bands. You can put a bunch of rubber bands, just cut up a bunch of rubber bands and put it in the water, and it gives you a texture. Boom, boom, boom. And see, it just makes it a round kind of leaves. This is a little bit different if you have different size rubber bands and how much pigment you put it in and how much water you have in it. It's all stuff you have to practice with. All things you have to practice. And then once you have that down, do you want a soft edge or hard edges? Do you want to do it into a soft edge, into a wet surface, or do you spray it afterwards? So let's try to spray this afterwards. And you'll see that a lot of this will then soften up because you're putting water down. Remember, water is what softens your edges in watercolor, and makes it harder is when you're doing it on dry paper. What happens if you take your, what do you call this, hake brush, and you go across it, and you can go across this, and you can, of course, you can make lines. Again, it's all about, and hake brushes soften things, and I've seen people, John Lovett uses white paint and puts it over his whole painting and uses this hake brush then to make it kind of a mist of white over everything, smoothing it out. All about soft and hard edges, and basically that's all you use in watercolor. Are you using a soft edge, making a soft edge, or a hard edge, or a textured edge? I mean, not hard edge. A hard edge is a hard edge, and a soft edge, but textured. Textured or smooth. That's what we're talking about today. Last thing, I have one of these bristle brushes that you can get like at Ace Hardware, Menards, Home Depot, and I like to. Some people cut into them. I know Bjorn Bernstrom cuts into these. Or was it, I forgot which artist, but they take it and they go in here, and I like to go into the paint and then really make this brush, look at how terrible it looks. You can make textures of grasses by just pulling it like this. You can make textures like that because this is a kind of a brush where you can make it look like it's branches, like at the end of the branches. You can press down, straight down, and you can make it look a little bit different. Textured on a rock, on a boulder, maybe. It's like little rocks, and you can make it look textured that way. And so I think that's pretty much all the things. Only thing I couldn't find, I know I had it somewhere here, but is a natural sponge. It kind of gives you the same effect as this does. You use a sponge as kind of like your brush, and you point it and push it down. Don't have one to show you about that, but it's the idea. Same as like this brush. You're taking and using the object as the brush and making texture. And again, texture can be hard edge like this, or you can soften it with either a brush like a hake brush like this. See, I can soften the edges on this, even though it's textured, it's soft then, with a hake brush. And if you want to make it so it just let the water do it, then you can take yourself like a mister like this, and then do that. All right, so that's how you get some textures. Soft, smooth edges versus hard edges. Not hard edges, textured edges. Smooth against textures is what we're talking about today. And again, a lot of people ask me about this airbrush. The airbrush is just, I found it on Amazon, and it's made for, cosmetics, and it's for makeup. I think makeup artists use it, and they use it for putting makeup on ladies' faces or guys' faces when they're doing up their faces. And again, that's another way. That's the only other way I can think of making a really super soft edge. All right. So join me on Thursdays for my paint-alongs. I do the Thursday night paint-along every Thursday night, Central Standard Time, 6:30. And I also put out a newsletter, what we're going to be painting that week, on Tuesdays. And so that went out this morning, or it's going out tomorrow morning. This is Monday right now. I'm making this. Tuesday morning, I put out as you're going to see this video in this newsletter. And to sign up for that newsletter, you go to my website at BeckerArt.net and sign up there. All right. So until next tip, we'll see you then. All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.